Hey everyone, it's Strange Michael. I hope you're doing well today. I have a TV show review, actually, this time around. This is for the newer 2019, I believe, Season 1 of Creepshow, the Shudder series. Of course, this is the kind of bringing back to life of this old show. Apparently, this is an 80s film, of course, and I saw it. It was fine. It was George Romero mixing up with Stephen King a little bit, and it was fine. I've never been a big fan of that. I like the very comic book nature that they maintain here that's in that original flick. Of course, not too long ago, Stephen King actually did some kind of adaptation or had a ghostwriter do an adaptation or something of some of those stories into a straight-up comic book. And that was kind of cool, seeing that a few years back. They also did a Creepshow 2 and 3. I haven't seen 3, but I saw 2, and I saw 2 one time, and I thought it was fine. I actually like certain aspects of that more than I like the first movie, you know? But I think overall the first film is pretty much the best. At some point I plan on reviewing those 2 or 3 movies here on the channel at some point. But I heard Creepshow 3 was pretty terrible. I don't know. I've never seen it. But at one point M. Night Shyamalan was going to make a new Creepshow movie or TV series or something. There's a teaser somewhere on YouTube you can find. It was pretty weird. Just like some zombie guy or somebody beating their head against a glass window or something. A lot of blood. And then it just ended. That was the advertisement of M. Night Shyamalan's Creepshow. Imagine how that would have went. That could have been wild. Even though I think The Visit, one of his more recent productions, was great. I haven't seen Old yet, but I loved The Visit. I think The Visit's one of his best films, if not his very best. Anyway, Creepshow. Season 1 has 6 episodes to it. There's a lot of featurettes and stuff in here too I haven't watched yet. But I did watch the first 6 episodes. I got this for my birthday and I was super stoked about it. I love films and shows and stuff that are anthologies, like The Twilight Zone, Tales from the Dark Side, different things like that. I grew up on that kind of thing, mainly Tales from the Dark Side and Twilight Zone and X-Files. Even though X-Files is technically not an anthology, it's episodic but not an anthology. I love stuff like that. That's my kind of niche of interest, short stories and whatnot. The interesting thing with this, of course, these are 45-minute long episodes, but half is dedicated to one story, the other half is dedicated to a different story, which is fascinating to me. I didn't expect them to go this route. I figured it'd be kind of like this newer Twilight Zone from Jordan Peele's garbage team of just being 1 hour long boring pieces of trash, and it wasn't like that. I was kind of impressed. This was actually like 22-minute, 23-minute long episodes. But I really dig this. I have not subscribed to Shudder just yet. I'm kind of thinking about it eventually. Whenever my wife ends up having to go back to work, she's been working from home for like 2 years now, but when she ends up having to go back, I'll probably get a subscription just so I can spend more time watching that kind of thing. Because right now it'd kind of go to waste. She doesn't like horror. I just don't really have the time to watch that around her. But I did watch this on my laptop quite a bit. And it was a blast. I really enjoyed this. My boy Sinister Cinema Reviews here on YouTube did videos on individual episodes and whatnot. I thought that was pretty cool. I'm kind of watching through those now since I just completely binged this in like a day. I don't binge TV shows. That should tell you how good this was. I burned through it. I really dug it. It's not perfect. I want to tell you that right now. No matter what the end of this review has as a rating for it, I haven't entirely made my mind up. I think as I slowly talk this out on camera, I think I'll really figure out what I think about rating this before I give you my official rating. But I really enjoyed it. I typically, and this is one of those things, I have a taste in stuff that a lot of people don't. You know, from movies, books, comics, anything. I really dig a lot of stuff that people don't dig. I will say this, I like experimentation. I appreciate that. I like adaptations. If I can get something like that that I'm familiar with, but see a new version of, I dig stuff like that. There's some cool stuff in this season. I'm really surprised more people didn't like this. And even this show kind of spawned off its own little Goosebumps type of series where they're doing like a Creepshow middle grade book series. I want to pick out those at some point when they come out. If they're not already being released, they might already be out. But I know there was at least 1 or 2 coming out. Anyway, this is an anthology series, different little stories. I don't want to tell you too much about it. I do want to kind of hint to certain stories, maybe talk about some of my favorites, maybe talk about the worst or 2 worst in my opinion. I'm going to have to kind of look at the back of the DVD box just to make sure. There's only 6 episodes, but there's certain things that certain episodes weren't that great. I'll be honest with you. There were a couple that I was intrigued, and there were certain people in this that had me interested, certain people tied to it that I thought were interesting. Like, for example, the show is, from what I understand, produced by Greg Nicotero, who everybody knows. Practical effects, he's a master. You know, he's a great, cool guy. Tied in with The Walking Dead. I think he's a producer on that too, I'm not really sure. But I love Nicotero. I've always known that name since I was a small boy at like the age of 10. Grown up on that name. Heard a lot of stuff. He's like Savini to me, you know, which by the way, Savini's involved with this too. There's some cool people involved with this. First episode opens up and it's Tobin Bell in a Stephen King adaptation of The Gray Matter. Now, Stephen King wasn't involved with this as far as I know. I don't know if he did the screenplay or whatever, I don't know. But I don't think he did. From my understanding, it's just a straight-up adaptation of his short story Gray Matter, which I did read. I think it's from Night Shift. But at the end of the episode, or at the end of the season, excuse me, the last episode adapted here is from Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, one of his short stories that I have not read. But that first story was kind of cool. Of course, it's about a young boy in the middle of a storm. He goes over to a like little restaurant, diner type of thing where there's a police sheriff played by Tobin Bell. Yeah, my boy, Jigsaw. He's teaming up with another guy, and they're kind of best buds, and they're hanging out with this other lady who happens to be Adrienne Barbeau. Is it her name? Yeah, Barbeau. You know, Friday the 13th. We all know her. She's involved in this in that first episode, too. They're hanging out during like a tsunami or whatever, coming onto this like small island. And this young boy comes in. I think he's from It. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure he's from Stephen King's It remake. The 2017 and I guess 2019, whatever, 2020, whatever it was. This kid shows up. He says his dad has become addicted to alcohol since his mom passed away and whatever. And he's having some issues with that, his home problems. And his dad has slowly started changing a lot in some weird, monstrous ways. And I gotta tell you, there's a lot of CGI in this season. In this episode in particular, this first one, there's not so much where it bothers me tremendously, but there's enough that I could say, okay, there's a lot of budget limitations in this show and a lot of bad choices. I will say that. As much as I enjoyed this season, there are some bad choices. There are some bad CGI choices, I'll tell you that up front too. This is an example where I think the CGI works fine, for the most part. The monster in the episode looks great, really dig it. I cannot remember what episode... Oh, you know what? There's a second part to that episode, of course. Like I said, each episode is divided up into two parts. That's my favorite, the second one. It's basically about a little girl who has a big old dollhouse that's custom made. She loves it so much. And within this particular house, she has a mother, a father, and a little son named Ethan that she has in this little dollhouse that she watches. Apparently, every time she glances away and looks back, they're moving around. And this episode felt like a creepypasta from No Sleep on Reddit. And I freaking love it. I think it's one of the best things ever done in horror. It was so clever, and it was so scary and intense and fun and eerie. It made me cringe at times with some of the certain things that had to happen. I think, if anything, it's the perfect episode in this entire thing. For real. I love it so much. So the little girl happens to be playing one day, and all of a sudden on top of the table in the coffee living room, on the coffee table, all of a sudden this like weird zombie-looking head shows up. And it's the same miniature size as her little dolls inside of the dollhouse. And she looks at it and she says the weirdest thing. She's like, "Where did you come from?" And this little thing is almost like a ghost. It's almost like a haunted house story you're seeing from this girl's eyes watching happen inside of this little dollhouse. And it's so creative. I love it, man. It's so freaking good. It's everything about it, from the screenplay to the acting of that little girl and her parents and whatnot. They're just so good, dude. It could be completely just picked apart scene by scene because of how clever and well done it is. I have a twitch in my eye, by the way. It just started kicking in like a second ago, in case you happen to see that and wonder what's going on. But that episode is phenomenal. It's hands down my favorite. It's so good, so clever. There's not really any gore to it, but the way the characters are kind of moving around, you never see that. That's such a smart choice. It's such a smart choice, but that little zombie head really affected me in the best possible way. There's a werewolf story in here with World War II, or World War I. I'm pretty sure it's World War II. That one's okay. I didn't hate it. I can see people hating it and think it's terrible. I thought the werewolf designs were okay for the most part. By the way, the season has a lot of gore in it. A lot of gore and a little bit of nudity. Not a ton of nudity, just a little bit here and there. Kind of respectful nudity, if you will. There's also a Monkey's Paw adaptation in here. Maybe not even an adaptation, just taking the story and doing something with it. And that was fine. I didn't hate that episode. I thought it was interesting. The acting is very good, at least from the older man character in that. Pretty decent. I'm not the biggest fan of monkey paw adaptations. You know, the story about the monkey's paw that you make 3 wishes and it curls up its fingers every time you make a wish, and then you probably die, but each wish kind of backfires on you. It's that type of storyline. It was alright. It's fine. A little bit of CGI in there. It is what it is. Let's see. We have one in the last episode about the losing weight with a worm, right, during a solar eclipse. People try to do this whole weight loss fad thing, which is, it didn't really have much to say about that industry. With me trying to lose weight myself, I think it's interesting if you would actually critique that. Talk about the fad diets, how it doesn't work. There's a certain way you have to lose weight. Fad diets don't do it. They didn't really go anywhere with that. Had some really great gore in there. Great practical effects in that episode. There's some really good practical effects that Greg Nicotero, I think, brought to a lot of this show. It really shows, in my opinion, some of the great practical effects here. But that particular one with the worm weight loss thing, that was a wild story. Kind of predictable, but wild. It was neat. What do you do? Let's see. There's an episode about the man in the suitcase. This kid goes to the airport, gets a suitcase. He goes back to his college dorm, and there happens to be a voice coming from the suitcase. He opens it up. There's this man, like, kind of beat up and wrapped up inside of this thing, kind of crunched up. He can't get himself out. He's asking the boy to. And every time the boy tries to help him out, he pulls one of his arms or his legs. The guy gets in pain, and he shoots a golden coin, an actual gold coin, out of his mouth that's worth like $500 a piece. And he and his friends start to exploit that. And there's some kind of themes and stuff in some of these episodes, some of them not so much. There's one in particular that involves David Arquette. And I love David Arquette in that episode. I'm not a big Scream series guy. It's not because of David Arquette. I like him. It's just, this was like him playing like a sheriff kind of guy with a bunch of other people who were supposedly betrayed their town or whatever. It felt very one-sided in this weird storytelling way, but they basically captured them, the current mayor. It felt like a weird Trump commentary. I don't know. It just felt like they were complaining to complain. I don't know. It was an oddball thing. Basically, a bunch of people who were considered the criminals in the town, a lady who had ruined somebody else's life by gossiping on her. Like David Arquette was in this playing a very gruff guy. His voice was fantastic, dude. David Arquette, if he hasn't done much voice acting, he should do it because his voice was perfect here. And he just knocked it out of the park with that performance. Basically, they get strapped to a chair and brought up through these holes in the ground where their necks and head stick up out of the ground like a baseball field. And zombies get released to go crawling and kind of do on public television this punishment. And, go after the heads that are sticking out of the ground, kind of like bowling. And it's interesting. It was interesting, but it was a rough episode. That's probably my least favorite. I don't know. It was bland. That was a great example of the budget restraints being a big issue for this show. A big, big issue. And it wasn't great, but it was like my least favorite, personally. Then the finale, like I said, one of the last parts of the last episode, of course, like I said, the worm diet episode of the last episode was good. It was fine. Had some cool stuff, practical effects. But there was another part of that was the Joe Hill adaptation. That was the final adaptation or whatever of this whole season. And it was basically about a girl and her brother who are living with their mom, and I don't know if he's a stepfather or just a piece of trash boyfriend to the mom that's living there, but he's a scumbag. The actor's fantastic. He plays a character named Chet. He has these boots that say shit kicker on them. It's great. The villain, Chet, is just awful, but apparently this young girl, her dad had passed away, and he claimed that there was some kind of sea monster thing out in the wilderness, like a dinosaur-like type of thing, a Loch Ness Monster type of thing, called Champy. And I think I've heard of Champy before, like an urban legend myth type of thing. And he believed that Champy was out in this woodsy area in like a kind of pond type of thing. I don't know how to explain it. But anyway, she runs away from the house after Chet kind of threatens her and mocks her dad that's passed away and whatever. He's just an awful, awful guy, but that actor is so good here. And she runs off in the woods with her little brother and her kind of love interest boyfriend guy who's dressed up like a doofus. He's dressed up like Rambo, but he's dressed like a doofus playing on something. He's got like a bandana around his head. This is 1984, boy. How old are you? You're like, he looks like he's like 17 or 18, but he's like, I guess he's playing like a 13-year-old. I don't know. The boy looks like a doofus. I look like a doofus, but that guy looks like a doofus too. He's carrying a knife around with the matches and the handle and all that, like a Rambo type of thing, and Chet keeps calling him Rambo. Yeah. So that episode has a little bit of heart to it, and I think that the production value harmed this episode greatly, and if I was Joe Hill, I would have probably facepalmed, honestly. I thought it was a decent episode, but I would have facepalmed with some of the practical effects done here. They're kind of embarrassing. I don't want to talk too much about it and why I feel that way, but I would feel embarrassed if I was Joe Hill, especially if I had seen my dad's adaptation with The Gray Matter, because The Gray Matter was a really solid episode. Tobin Bell was casting Adrienne Barbeau. So many cool people involved there. Great effects, great practical effects, great acting, all of that. And that first episode of Creepshow, and then you end with Joe Hill, the Son's adaptation, and it's a little rough. But again, I liked it for the most part. I didn't hate it at all. Let's see, is there anything else I'm forgetting off the top of my head? Oh, there's a Scarecrow episode about a guy running away from his bully, and he pulls a stake out of the Scarecrow to try to have or it's a cane actually, to try to have a weapon. And the Scarecrow comes to life and starts to come after him. There's kind of this whole backstory involved with that. It was fine. it was a fine episode. I didn't hate it at all. I had a good time. The more I've talked myself through these episodes, the more I realize how much my enjoyment varied, but I did enjoy all of them. Does that make sense? Can you criticize something to death, but also enjoy it? Because I'm like that. I'm not hard to please when it comes to horror or thrillers or anything like that. I just have a very particular taste that I consider excellent or great, but I do typically enjoy most things I watch. I think as long as they're well made or enjoyable, I typically have a good time. And this is a good example of a show that I had a really good time with. One of my favorite things about it is the animatronic for the Creep. They have an animatronic for the Creep most of the time. Most of the time. Sometimes it's just a guy in a mask, depending on what they need him to do. They might have him like holding a fishing rod and trying to reel something in. They just have a guy in a mask looking over this way where you can not have his mouth moving or anything, but he looks decent. But the animatronic with the actual eyes and face and everything moving look great. I really love it. It's actually modeled to look like this, but this is more of a comic book look because, of course, Creepshow has a very comic book look to it. The Creep in the animatronic form looks fantastic. I really like it. It's a little slow and laggy on the animatronic aspects, like the eyes and everything else. It doesn't look as real as it could, but I don't really care. It reminds me of the 80s. I didn't even live in the 80s, but I love it. I absolutely love that. So that's big old points for me. Every time you end an episode or a story in between a 45-minute episode, you have that little filler in between each episode, you have the Creep do something, and I dig that. It's usually animated, though, and sometimes it's not, but sometimes it's typically animated. The animation's okay. It looks very much like the Tales from the Crypt cartoon that I have not seen much of, but I've seen the art style and I know what it looked like. That's what it kind of looks like to me. They do maintain the comic book stuff. There is some changing from panel to panel. When episodes open up and when they close, you have covers of comics. At the end of each episode, you actually tease what the next episode's going to be about with a new comic strip that lands in a pile of comics. That's pretty cool. I like that transition to go from episode to episode. I kind of know what to get excited for. There's some really cool stuff in Creepshow Season 1. I'm very bummed that people are not talking more about this show, especially to be out a couple of years now. On my Michael Goosebumps fan channel where I talk about Goosebumps and R.L. Stine stuff, I hear people constantly mention this to me and ask me if I'm going to talk about it on there. Back in the day, I probably would have. Probably not now because of, again, the nudity and the lots and lots of gore. At least every episode has a bunch of gore somewhere in it, and I love that. I'm a gore hound. But there's some really good stuff in here. I recommend it. Some really cool things. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anybody else I'm forgetting in this show. It also says Kid Cudi's in here, and I cannot for the life of me remember what episode he was in. I love Kid Cudi. He was great when he made his Friday Night music. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about the show. I really like Creepshow Season 1. What did you guys think about it? I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments down below. Did you love this season? Did you hate it? I know Creepshow Season 2 is coming out December 7th for DVD release, which I will be picking up. I hope to get a Shudder account at some point. I really like what I'm seeing come out of Shudder. What I've heard from people like Sinister Cinema Reviews, one of my favorite YouTuber reviewers of all time for horror or otherwise. I just like his reviews. But I'm really excited to see what I can find out for more Creepshow stuff. I know there's already like 3 or 4 seasons now. It's still ongoing, something like that. But I really like this a lot. This is my kind of show. I wish we had a revival of like Tales from the Dark Side and whatever. Because this is perfect. This is not really politicizing anything. This isn't some weird bias of anything, you know? This is not really like in favor of media or any weird kind of things that we're seeing nowadays. This is just plain fun, and we don't have things like this anymore with the superhero genre or thriller genres or really anything nowadays. Everything has to be a commentary on something. I don't need that. Like I said, there's one episode in here you could kind of debate whether there's anything being said there or not. Most of the time these have a theme, but it's not anything outside of philosophical in a good way. And I like that. And a lot of them are just plain fun. They're gore fun, they're just wild fun. That's what I was looking for. I had a good time with this. If I had to rate Creepshow Season 1 on a 5-star basis, I would give it about a 3 out of 5 stars. I wanted to give it more of a 4. I just can't push myself to that, but I had a really good time. My ratings are going to be based on enjoyability factor. I feel like if I went back to watch this a second time, all the way through the whole season, I feel like I would nitpick more. But I had a blast with this. This is something I will rewatch at some point. It's one of those things I will always remember how much I like this. And I'll tell you right now, I had a better time watching this than I have every time I've watched the first film back in the day or the second film. That's just my opinion. I've only seen the second film like twice. The first film I've seen 2 or 3 or 4 times, something like that. But I like this more already. That's just my personal opinion. I'm not trying to be a shill. That's how I feel. Anyway, what are your thoughts on Creepshow? Put them down below once again. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Merry Christmas and goodbye.